Welcome to our second episode of the Fresh Cred DC series. It was with great pleasure I had the opportunity to sit down with the leads of the two border state produce association. Dante Galeazzi, CEO of the Texas International Produce Association, and Lance Youngmeyer, president of the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas. Guys, 60% of all fresh produce consumed in the U.S. is imported from Mexico. And these two gentlemen and their members oversee and ensure this product flows efficiently into the United States. Dante and Tippa also responsibility of ensuring efficient flows of Texas-grown fresh produce. Therefore, I could not think of two better gentlemen to have on today's show to talk about some very important issues facing the industry today. We'll be talking about the tomato suspension agreement, the labor issues and challenges facing both the U.S. and Mexico, and the major water crisis facing Mexico and South Texas. So buckle in for some great discussion and thoughts on these major issues facing today's fresh produce farmers. The outcome of these three issues will affect everyone from the field to the fork. Welcome, gentlemen, to the Fresh Cred.
Hi, Greg.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you guys here. Glad to be in D.C. Got a couple of hot topics to talk about. The first one I'm super excited to go over and kind of delve off into. You know, that actually may take us through the whole show. It's such a hot topic. But, everybody is super resistant to have a conversation around the tomato suspension agreement. It's got some pretty hard beliefs. But, want to have a chance to talk to you guys, right? You're both on the border. You both represent two major associations that deal with this. Few tomatoes cross both in Texas and in Arizona. And so figured what better guys to at least have this conversation with and talk a little bit about, and ideally for the audience, want to get out, what is it, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about what goes on and those of us that are involved with it day to day, but one of you, what is the tomato suspension agreement exactly? Lance, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So the tomato suspension agreement is an agreement between the United States and Mexico. It stems from an anti-dumping dispute that was in the early 1990s, where the Florida industry accused the Mexican industry of selling tomatoes at below cost, and that resulted in a court case and an investigation. And at the time, the Department of Commerce came out with a ruling that said they thought there was dumping. We disagreed with that, but that's the ruling that came out, and that put in a series of anti-dumping duties that were there. And the cost of those became so much that over a short period, the Mexican growers went to the Department of Commerce and says, let's make another agreement so that the Florida growers can be protected. And what it came out of that was an agreement that's been renewed every 5 years that has a series of rules about how to trade tomatoes from Mexico. Primarily, that has established a minimum price, what they call the reference price. So some people think tomato suspension agreement, it suspends the price. No, it suspended the duties. And what it does is it creates a system of trading rules that are designed to ensure that the U.S. industry can also prosper.
All right, so let me real quick see about breaking that down. So what you're saying is growers primarily in Florida, I mean it's kind of an East Coast thing, but primarily Florida, felt like Mexico was dumping product in the U.S. market. They wanted some resolution to that problem, and ultimately the resolution came down to the tomato suspension agreement, which avoids tariffs but establish some rules for operating the tomato business.
So real quick, I think it's important that we back up and we explain what dumping is, right? Because
great idea.
It might have been a while since someone's been in high school economics and remembers this term.
Yeah, I'm not sure they taught that in West Mesquite, but go ahead, please.
So dumping refers to selling product in a foreign market at a cheaper rate than you're selling it in your own home market.
Okay.
Right? The idea being that you protect your own market.
Right.
So basically that's like saying Mexico came along and said, okay, we're going to sell in Mexico for $5, but we're only going to sell for $3 in the U.S. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about all the logistics involved, but I'm neither here nor there. Again, happened in the 90s, but that's what we're talking about here. There's a group of U.S. tomato guys that want to make sure that tomatoes are sold in the U.S. at the same price they're being sold in Mexico or higher in the U.S., with the idea being that it gives the U.S. producers more ability to succeed in the same marketplace.
Sure. All right, so that kind of sets the stage as to what the tomato suspension agreement is. Has it worked?
I believe it has worked. We've seen the industry in Florida continues to have good operations. The tomato industry as a whole has grown because you've seen a proliferation of new varieties,
Okay.
Snacking tomatoes, grape tomatoes, different tomatoes that fill voids where the Florida industry was not. The Florida industry has grown primarily for many years what's called a mature green or a gas green tomato.
Okay.
They grow them in a bush style plant, and they pick them all at once, and they're picked green literally and taken to a warehouse where they're put in a room with ethylene gas that turns them pink or red. But you don't get the same flavor that you get out of your backyard or a tomato that's been exposed to sun and ripened naturally. And so Mexico has thrived because of that. They've got a lot of different places to grow tomatoes. A lot of different technologies are being used, from greenhouses to shade houses, including open field. And they're essentially filling what the retailers asked for, which is different snacking tomatoes, greenhouse tomatoes, tomatoes on the vine. So for consumers, it's been great because we've seen a framework for success, a framework where companies can invest in their product lines with innovative products that consumers want, that retailers clamor for, and it's still provided a framework for the Florida growers every 5 years to go to the Department of Commerce and ask for terms of the suspension agreement to be updated. Every 5 years, it is updated, and that's kind of where we're getting close to right now. What has happened in recent years is the last year the Florida Tomato Exchange asked for the tomato suspension agreement to be terminated early and for duties to go in place. And it's kind of complicated, and that's why Dante and I are working so hard on this now. And I hope I'm not skipping ahead here. But
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. But and before we get to that, I mean, Dante, I want to turn to you on a question, right? So yeah,
Sure.
So Florida's asked for this to actually end it early, and in all fairness to those guys, I mean, my question is, yeah, what do you think's driving that? I mean, I think I've got a pretty good idea, and I mean, I'll put it out there. One thing is we have this agreement, but I think there's this belief that maybe not everybody participates. Would you say that's correct, or is there some other reason that they would want to end it? Why would they want to change it, do you think?
So what they say out loud is that their belief is there's still a lot of people on the Mexican producing side or the Mexican sales side that are not following the rules.
Okay.
Commerce hasn't found that to be the case after many investigations, but still. In my opinion, though, what I think is happening is you're looking at companies that see an opportunity to eliminate a foreign producer in their market. So what that means is they would then have the ability to reduce competition, and therefore they would have more control of the marketplace in the US. And if you have control of a marketplace, you're able to control supply, you're able to better control prices. More importantly, you're able to control your long-term forecast and your contracts, right?
Yeah.
And so that to me is the business decision. But again, I'm just telling you what they're
Yeah,
saying.
no,
out
I mean,
loud.
again,
Yeah.
that's kind of the deal, right? Because I mean, they're not here. It's a real question, and obviously, it's a real concern, right? And I know that there has been a reduction, from what I understand.
Right.
I mean, I said I know, but from what I understand, there has been a reduction. I think the argument is there's a lot of different contributing factors to that reduction, but the reality of it is, I think, from their side of it, I think it's the rule piece of it is of concern. People actually following by the rules, and literally the reduction in the
Craig, you
farming
mentioned a reduction. I assume you're talking about in Florida tomatoes.
yeah, correct.
And I think that has been the case. They've not grown with the rest of the market, but they're also, as I mentioned, growing a product that is not in demand. You have seen a lot of growth in the United States in greenhouses all around the country, in Virginia and Kentucky, Iowa, everywhere you can think of, Texas. And those places are primarily growing grape tomatoes and tomatoes on the vine, stuff that the grocery stores want.
Right.
And so when you are in a supply and demand market and you're not supplying what is in demand,
So
natural things are
so
going to
what
happen.
you're saying is the demand has shifted in what people are looking for.
Right. And I want to go back to your topic over here. I mean, we see this across the board in the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
Domestic production is falling off, but like you said, it's for a variety of reasons, right? Overregulation is probably the single biggest one.
Okay.
But more importantly, the fact is it's happening across a variety of sectors, not just in fresh produce, not just in agriculture. I mean, look at manufacturing. Manufacturing is going overseas as well because they're looking for that labor supply that can put together or assemble those items at different prices. There are so many geopolitical challenges that go into these types of things when you look at the marketplace securing product from foreign producers, that it's hard to get behind the idea that, oh, it's this one issue. These guys aren't following the suspension agreement. It's just not that.
It's not that. You can't distill it down to that one thing.
And I think it's, as you mentioned earlier, the suspension agreement, Department of Commerce does a review from time to time, and they have found that it is in compliance. And the way a suspension agreement is supposed to work is supposed to eliminate over 85% of the dumping from the market, and that is what has occurred.
Right. So, prior to this, I'd looked at some statistics, right? Because, I'm curious as to, we talk about throughout all the year different consumption patterns, right? And one thing, and looking at data from 2000, which I believe suspension in 96 is when the suspension agreement went in, right? So basically from 2000 up until 2022, I wanted to look at the consumption piece. And if you look at it on a per capita consumption, it's oddly enough, it was 19 pounds per capita in 2000, and it was 19 pounds in 2022. Now that number, if you look at it over the years, it's gone up. Some years it's come down, but literally those 2 years represented. And if you do the math on that, and you compare the population that existed then to the population that exists now, there's a billion with a B more pounds of tomatoes being consumed in the United States. That's a 20% growth over the course of that time frame. I don't know. That seems pretty good. And then in conjunction with that, we talk about pricing, and then dumping typically means, you're getting cheaper goods put into a marketplace.
Right.
When you look at the average retails from that same time frame, you take a look at the retails, they've gone up as much as 35% since 2022. So, again,
it's hard to argue the agreement isn't working.
It feels like the agreement's working. It feels like there's certainly, I would like to see the per capita consumption. I'd like to see more people eating more tomatoes as individuals. But, for crying out loud, a billion more pounds, and on that growth rate, we're going to have a substantial amount of additional tomatoes. We don't definitely need them to be less, right? We don't need more things to keep product out. We need more product coming in, and ideally, maybe some more farms will go into the tomato business and some of the different varieties.
Listen, there's room on the produce shelf for everybody. The consumer will decide the winners and the losers. The consumer will.
Yeah.
So we've seen great growth in Roma tomatoes. That's something Mexico originated and specializes in. And as I mentioned also, all the different colorful tomato varieties you see, yellows and purples, a lot of those are the result of years and years of investments in breeding.
Yep.
And the companies that have put those investments in are oftentimes part of a year-round program. These are companies that are growing in Mexico. They're also growing in the United States. They're growing in Canada. They oftentimes pitch to their customers, we can get you the same quality tomato, the same size, the same price, or at an agreed-upon price all year long. And when you're only in the business for a certain set amount of months of the year, you lose a whole lot of competitive advantage. And that's where Florida has found themselves. Ironically, a lot of the Florida producers, the integrated chain marketers, have actually invested heavily in Mexico. So you have a number of the large tomato conglomerates from Florida that have significant investments in tomatoes in Mexico. Why? Because tomatoes from Mexico are more often grown in greenhouses, more often grown to a full flavor profile that the consumer wants.
Well, it's similar to the avocado industry. California avocado guys, they've got operations both in California and in Mexico. Today's episode is brought to you by our episode partner, Corner Image Packaging. Corner Image is an innovative, forward-thinking company that offers recycled, reusable, and sustainable products. Mike Ellis and his team listen to and understand how their customers do business, and every day they strive to provide them with the most economical and environmentally friendly solutions to their business needs. So if your business is in need of labels, print equipment, pallets, cartons, consumer packaging, and/or other packing supplies, contact Corner Image. Mike and his team also provide consulting and inventory management services to simplify your packaging material needs. So check out Corner Image Packaging at their website, Corner Image PKG. That's cornerimagepkg.com. Check them out. You won't be disappointed.
All right. Well, like I said, we could talk the whole show on this. I do have, it's important on all these topics we talk about. We are in D.C. I don't know if you guys would have the same answer, but, Dante, I'll start with you. What can DC do? What is it we're here to ask DC to do, or you're here, your group, the TIPA organization? Right. Why are you here for that particular?
So my ask is this. This year, as Lance mentioned, we're starting the sunset review, which basically decides they keep the suspension agreement or we go back to a tariff system. So my ask is to Congress, to elected officials, to anybody, be aware of this process. Know that it's happening. More importantly, know what the two outcomes are, right? Because the outcome where the agreement stays in place means you keep enjoying tomatoes, you keep enjoying a variety of them all year long, and you get full access. Know that the agreement going away means you're going to see a lot less tomatoes on the shelf. They're going to be a whole lot more expensive, and you're not going to have anywhere near the variety.
Is that your answer?
Generally, I'll add in a little bit. I think you would. Look, they're talking about putting a tariff of 20% plus on tomatoes.
Okay.
That doesn't just disappear. It gets passed on. And what happens is restaurant chains that put 3 tomato slices on a Subway sandwich, or a sub-style sandwich, let me say,
okay,
might only put 2 slices on there. A restaurant chain that sells burgers might sell thinner slices of tomatoes. So they have ways of getting around this. But the consumer that goes to the grocery store and has to buy the tomatoes, they're still going to go for the ones they want that have good flavor, but they're going to be paying more. And we're in a position right now of high food inflation all across the board. And when you look at climate change, there are so many disasters happening everywhere that it's really unpredictable to say where you can actually get tomatoes from. If you cut Mexico out of the market and rely solely on Florida, well, there's a lot of hurricanes happening. In fact, they're predicted to have, I believe, 20 more hurricanes this season more than normal because of changing patterns. So for consumers, we need multiple choices of where tomatoes come from, and you can't restrict a part of that by putting higher tariffs on Mexican tomatoes. So we ask that the status quo remain, that the suspension agreement be renegotiated. There's already a process in place to renegotiate that every 5 years, and that's what needs to happen for American consumers.
That should be easy enough for everybody to do. That sounds like to me do nothing or do the same of what you've been doing. You don't have to come up with anything new. All right. So let's get into another very much important topic, and that's labor. And Dante, I'm going to turn to you first on the labor question, because certainly you've got many members that deal with the labor situation here in the United States. What's going on with Texas? What's going on around the country? How is the labor situation for ag space?
It's terrible. Okay. In a word, it's terrible. And the reason it's terrible, Craig, is because ag labor is among the least desirable jobs for American citizens. And this is the case in any sophisticated first world country. Agriculture is always the least desirable job. Look at Europe, right? Europe has workers coming from Africa to harvest those crops. Look at the Middle East. It's not even the people that live there. They're bordering countries that often come in to harvest those crops. It is always this case, always has been. And so we rely on a certain percentage of foreign workers to come into the country for agricultural work. Right. We as a country have continued to make access to those workers harder and harder and harder. You have a combination of overregulation impacting people. You have a combination of bad or lacking legislation that's preventing workers from coming in. But primarily what you have is you have almost 4 decades of inaction by Congress to address the issue. And so we all know if you have an issue and it just adds up year after year, it gets worse. So this problem has only gotten tremendously worse over 40 years. And now we're in a position where you have climate change happening, you've got water shortages, you've got new rules for how you bring in your employees. So you add all these factors together, and it just creates this tremendously unnecessary impact on domestic producers. So they are basically without workers. And the workers that are here, unfortunately, a lot of them are undocumented or improperly documented or whatever the term is now that we're using. Yeah. But basically, of about the 1.5 to 2 million workers that we need in fresh produce, the estimate is something like half of those guys have improper documentation. So you have this huge, huge challenge where we have a shortage. The workforce that's here isn't that reliable, and there's no good path forward.
What Dante's talking about is exacerbated by a couple factors. The H-2A program is very expensive to be part of. It's not easy to get into. And I think there's broad consensus in the produce industry to fix it, make it much bigger, make it much better. We all need good labor in this country. So in addition to the political impasse that we find ourselves at, where Mexico is demonized, or we have flashpoints about the border, and that translates to Washington D.C. and labor. In addition to an inability to reach an agreement about how to fix this in Washington D.C., you have individual state laws that make it criminal to be in that state and be undocumented. And in particular, Georgia's had one on the books for a number of years. So if you wanted to go work in Florida, first you had to get through Georgia to drive there. And now Florida has a rule on the books just like that too. So I think you have to look and say, what are states, what is the general public willing to do about this to make sure that there is enough labor? And there's a lot of trends towards robotics, towards how we can use technology to harvest this fruit, and that's going to come. It's going to be great, but we're not there yet.
Well, yeah, and exactly. I think it's an immediate problem, and certainly technology is going to solve everything. AI is going to fix it all, but it's probably not going to be tomorrow, is kind of the thing. So H2A, you brought it up. The H2A deal, from what I read, it's there, but it's lacking in some areas in some departments.
That's
right?
putting it very politely.
Is that, I mean,
So first off, H-2A is a visa program.
Okay.
So people have to apply to be a worker. More importantly, as an employer, you also have to apply to participate in the program to pool workers with H-2A visas. So you've got a dual application process going.
Okay.
You have to pay to submit your application as the employer. You have to pay for the guys that you're funneling or that you're hiring in the foreign country. You have to pay for all of them. But on top of all of that, Craig, you have all of these issues. Let's stay on this pay rate with H-2A, right? So in Texas, the beginning rate for the lowest level of job in H-2A is $14.85 per hour. On top of that per hour rate, the employer has to pay for them to fly the worker into the country and back out. They have to pay to house that worker the entire time they're here, so 8 to 10 months. They have to pay for the workers' transportation back and forth from the field. They pay for 3 meals a day. Plus, they pay to take them into town once a week, so that way they can get all the general necessities they might need, including laundry or just health visits, etc. So you're talking about a cost that's a little closer to let's see, it was $14.85, $3 more an hour. So now you're talking about something that's almost $18 an hour for farm labor.
Right.
We just had a Texas guy tell us that when you start looking at all the diversity of roles and the additional expenses on top of the ones I just mentioned, he said it was closer to $23 an hour.
I was going to ask what the fully loaded. So yeah, and that does, but $23 an hour makes it really hard to, like I say, I mean, to get folks or to be able to afford that and then get a crop out of the ground and then go to market with it and sell it. Yeah. So something that, but is, in terms of a fix, right? So there's H2A, the other hot topic, right, that's here on the Hill, which is relevant not just from a labor, but, wouldn't immigration reform help? What do you think?
Well, I think immigration reform would help on a lot of fronts. If there was good immigration reform and a good guest worker program, we wouldn't need to have as much attention put towards the border, right, which from the perspective of our association, where we're trying to help produce get across the border at the ports of entry, that would be a huge fix to say the border is not a problem anymore. Maybe it's naive to say that, but I think to fix immigration would be a huge factor.
There's kind of a canopy effect to getting that fixed, right? You got stuff coming over quicker. You don't have as many agents, bound up checking in people or trying to catch people or whatever. Anyway, I mean, there's a whole, in terms of the supply chain, there's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, so with that, okay, so going back to my question, I mean, can you can you real quickly think about how we distill it down? What would be the ask? Would it be immigration, when we're on the Hill? Is it, look, guys, immigration reform, that's going to be the biggest impact. Let's do this, or
I'm going to tell you, from my opinion, no, because immigration is too politically charged. It is one of the largest red button issues, and you talked about it. You've got the border perception issue. You have a whole lot of other issues that bundle into immigration. So I think trying to eat that elephant, so to speak, it's just too big right now.
Okay.
But H2A reform, you nailed it. That's got to be the big one, because right now there's so many issues with H2A. You know, I mentioned it earlier. You're only allowed to bring in your employee for several months, right? I think it's 10 months. So if you're running a greenhouse in Texas and you need your employees for a full year, guess what? You don't qualify. That's a problem, right? In addition, you have to have your employee reapply to this program every single year. So there's no efficiencies in this system. Zero. You basically start from zero every single time.
So go ahead. You got something to add to that?
There's other facets too. You have to first advertise the job, demonstrate that you were not able to actually get someone local to apply, and then you can be part of the program and bring in people. And if you're a seasonal producer, Dante mentioned greenhouses, but let's talk about the open field people up and down the eastern seaboard, for instance, growing vegetables. You don't know exactly when your crop's going to be ready. And you have to somehow time out, am I going to get enough labor to actually pick this crop? And then they're going to move on to the next farm further up north when the season's done here. That's a huge degree of invariability that you can't predict, and business is all about predictability. So that's a huge thing that I think impacts the growers all around.
All right, so like I say, just to try and keep it where we can get something focused, and I appreciate the immigration being too much of a complicated. That's a good point. So in H2A, look, we need to be able to extend the amount of time. It sounds like at least a year, at least 12 months. That would be the one ask that we're going to ask up on the Hill. And then, second to that, got to take a look at the cost side of it. And, having spending $20 to $23 on workers and the ability to compete and be able to keep prices down where consumers keep, choosing fresh fruits and vegetables. So would you guys both agree those are really the two kind of main asks if we focused on H2A?
I would say those are two of the biggest asks, yes. And that, real quick before we get off of it, that wage rate, it goes up every single year, and you don't know when it's going up until December. And then you have to start applying that new rate about a week later. So you have no idea as an employer what you're going to pay for your labor next season.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a comment on that, but I'll refrain from my comment. So, all right. So last but not least, it's not as hot a topic as it should be because, people have always had access to water. Water seems very plentiful. It rains occasionally, maybe not as much in some areas as it should. But this is an issue globally, and there's been people have talked about water is going to become the new gold, and I think we're starting to face that. Doesn't make a difference right now where you come down on the climate change or any of that. Don't think this is a discussion about that. These are real facts, real issues. And I know both you guys have members that are battling this. Lance, I know in Sinaloa, it is the main thing. And Dante, in your backyard, from what I understand. So, Lance, I'll turn to you to kind of kick us off with what's going on in Sinaloa. What's the outlook in terms of water and what's going to happen there?
Sinaloa is going through the same thing that California had been going through for recent years, where it was very dry in California. Now, California's had some atmospheric rivers that are filling up the reservoirs. Things are great there, but the same dry conditions have persisted on the west coast of Mexico. And a lot of the fresh produce is grown on the west coast of Mexico. They have reservoirs there, but those reservoirs over the years have been going from 40% to 30% to 20% to now they're in their teens. And so the governments there, the state governments, are having to go in and say, okay, we grow a lot of tomatoes in this state, we grow a lot of bell peppers in this state, we grow a lot of corn in this state, we grow this and that. What can we afford to put this water towards? And every state has a different reality in Mexico, different amounts of water, and different realities of how they're willing to allocate that. And so that is one of the things that I think has reduced the amount of fruits and vegetables out of Mexico. We've seen the markets have been higher the past few years because the predictability. If you don't know for sure that you're going to have water, you're not going to put that crop in the ground because you don't know if you can bring it to market. And that's not to say there's a lot of great things that Mexico has been doing and other places are to preserve water. In fact, that's one of the hugest things going on right now is how do we grow in an environment that reduces the amount of water that keeps in that helps the plants respire properly. And a lot of that is in greenhouses and shade houses, but it's also using drip irrigation and finding ways to control the water. And a lot of it comes down to have you planned ahead. Some growers are on lands that have wells, and some growers are faced with whatever can be delivered through the public systems.
Wow.
And so that's a system that's become extremely problematic in Sinaloa, Sonora, and a lot of other places in Mexico. You see Mexico City is having some very major drought situations there. They don't even know if they can keep enough water for the residents of Mexico City. They used to be a lake. Things are changing.
All right, Dante. How are things in South Texas?
Man, you know what? It's worse than the Sinaloa situation. So Lance talked about water being in the teens. We're in the single digits now. So where I'm at in South Texas and in Tamaulipas, Mexico, we really have one source of fresh water, and that's the Rio Grande River. And I realize for anyone that's bilingual, it's superfluous to say Rio and river in the same sentence, but let's just pretend for the sake of it, I'm going to say Rio Grande River so I don't confuse it with Rio Grande Valley. Anyway, we depend on the river, only source of fresh water. You talked about wells. Yeah, we can drill wells down 250, 300 feet, but those wells, the water is going to be salinated because we're so close to the ocean. You're going to have a ton of heavy metals in it because we have so much clay that has absorbed just everything that has been introduced to the ground and dumped it into those aquifers. So yeah, we can't tap into wells. We depend on the Rio. Right now, the problem is we have a treaty that basically dictates who gets access to the water of the Colorado River and the Tijuana River and the Rio Grande River regarding Mexico and the U.S. And it says the U.S. has to deliver so much water to Mexico via the Colorado and the Tijuana. And then in return, Mexico delivers so much water back into the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande depends on about 40% of its total flow from the Rio Conchos Basin, which is in Chihuahua, Mexico, and Coahuila, Mexico. The other 60% comes from the Pecos and the Colorado.
And you guys are going to need to get your Mexico map out for all these geographical locations, but continue on,
Yes,
sir.
So basically what has happened is over the last 30 plus years, Chihuahua, Mexico has developed their agricultural industry by leaps and bounds. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of additional irrigated acres that did not exist 30 years ago.
Okay.
And at this point, they're essentially thumbing their nose at the treaty, at both the federal government of Mexico and the federal government of U.S. They're not cooperating, so they're introducing 0% of that 40% of water into the Rio. On top of that, the flows, we talked about this, the flows of water of the Colorado and the Pecos River are down significantly. You just have so many more people. That's more people absorbing water. That's more people with grass, more people with agriculture, etc. And so that downflow is significant as well. It's something like, I think we're only getting 30% of the water from the Pecos versus the 60%. So now instead of 100% of water, you only have 30% flow.
Right.
And that Rio Grande River has got to satisfy all the communities along the Texas border from El Paso down to McAllen on both sides of the river.
Wow.
And we just don't have that water by the time you get to the very bottom users, that being the Rio Grande Valley of Texas and Tamaulipas. Fast forward to today, after 30 years of that, we're now in a situation where our farmers are beyond having to decide whether or not they put in the crop. Now they're at the point where they have to decide if they can even keep farming because there may be no water for them next year. They may have nothing. So how do you survive as a farmer if you go a year without planting anything?
So the U.S. is delivering water to Mexico as
Yes.
well, correct? Have we been holding up our end of the bargain?
Every year.
So the U.S. has been doing their part. Mexico has not.
Chihuahua, by the way, I want to make sure that we're clear. It's Chihuahua, Mexico that
It's
is
a
not
single state.
the single state because Mexico has two other states that are hurting real bad, Tamaulipas and Nuevo León. You talked about water restrictions in Mexico City. Monterrey, Mexico has had those water restrictions in place for the last 2 summers. They're probably going to have it again this summer, where they basically turn on water service to a house for 2 hours a day. That's it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 2 hours. So you better be ready to capture all that water for everything you need. I'm talking flushing toilets, taking showers, drinking, don't matter. You got 2 hours, so you better catch all the water you need for the whole day.
So for this treaty, trying to bring
Yeah,
it
yeah,
around,
sorry.
what happens? right? So we're here in D.C. You're going to be talking to your state representatives. What's going to be your ask? I mean, a bill's really not going to do you any good. They can charge whatever, and maybe they pay, maybe they did. It doesn't really make any difference. People still don't have water. Farmers still can't grow. And so what is the ask?
So we got two asks. One is we need to see some changes to that treaty. There's no teeth to it. So there's basically no consequence for Chihuahua not complying.
Okay.
Zero. There's got to be teeth. Number two is obviously at this point, we're in the middle of summer, right? We're depending on a maybe rain in July or August to fill up the Rio Grande out of New Mexico. That's a huge, huge gamble. I'm talking like we're doing rain dances down in South Texas type of prayers. So we are going to need disaster assistance. Because like I said, how do you keep a farming operation afloat if you don't have any product for 1 year? You still got to pay banks. You still got to pay employees. You've got salaries. Your own family needs to be taken care of. So we're going to need some sort of disaster assistance to get these guys through a year, because I unfortunately think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have very little or no water down in South Texas.
Wow.
Things change. We do hope that weather patterns can bring us some more water, just like California has gotten a lot.
Yeah.
But I think longer term, we have to recognize we have been, as a society, as countries, tapping into our aquifers, and they're going away.
Yep.
And we're using that water indiscriminately, and all industries, not just fresh produce, have to figure out how they're going to be better. People at home have to figure out how they're going to be better. If we were being smart, we would design cities with dual use waters, where the gray water is literally going to water the lawns. And right now, I would imagine less than 1% of gray water in this country is reclaimed.
I think the other issue too is that we simply are not willing yet to accept the price tag for new water production. So what I'm talking about is brackish water treatment plants and desalination plants. They are very expensive, right? Down in Texas, in Hidalgo County, they're going to buy 3 brackish water treatment plants. Each one of those cost about $30 million, and they don't treat a whole heck of a lot of water. A desalination plant down in South Texas probably costs us $1.2 billion, and that's for a small scale. So you're talking about some massive price tags. But let's face it, Lance, you capture the situation perfectly. For too long, our society has tapped into our water resources without replenishing it. Conservation is great, but you can't conserve what you don't have. We have got to generate water. We have the technology as a society. We have the technology available. It's deployed in New Zealand, in Australia, in the Middle East. We just are not willing yet to absorb the price tag, and I think that time has come. I think that time is beyond us, but I think it has absolutely come, and it's now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's what I said at the intro. You know, it's not, frankly, it's just not been a hot topic because it always seems things work out one way or the other. Consumers don't seem to notice. There's nobody getting the water turned on 2 hours a day yet in the United States. But I can tell you, when that kind of stuff starts to happen, there will be some people waking up.
That price tag looks a lot smaller when it comes to your hometown.
Yeah, it does indeed. And, you know, and it's concerning. I mean, because like I said, the problem is now, you know, and you talk about South Texas, and I know the guys down there. I mean, I know the comments they've made. And I can tell you in Sinaloa, you know, there's guys that have definitely made decisions not to plant. And as we look forward in next year, because we got the hurricane last year, and it really saved this year. If they don't get another something like that, and same thing in South Texas, you know, frankly, I think next year, I think out of both areas, there's going to be some real effects on the ag space. And, you know, outside of us getting blessed with some, you know, nobody wishes for a hurricane, but frankly, that's the only thing that brings enough moisture to make a difference. And outside of some sizable hurricanes, you know, and the Gulf is predicted to have some. Just the question is, will they get further enough south, right? You know, they tend to hit further up north. But look, gentlemen, like I say, all this stuff's great information. I really appreciate you coming in and having a chance to talk about it. We just hit them on a cursory note, you know, for everybody out there that's listening or watching. You know, I think that's important because these issues, quite often, nothing ever happens because they get too broad, too big, too complicated, and, you know, we just kind of mingle around them, right? And so ideally with this, messaging is, you know, on these 3 key topics to what's happening here in D.C. and happening in governments, in Mexico and stuff like that, is how do we distill it down to where people can kind of understand it? And I'm hoping, this little session here has helped that. So,
if I can make one final point on water, Craig, and I think it ties in a few of these things. When you think about what countries do with each other, industries, they trade resources back and forth. You're either trading a finished good for something for money, or maybe you're trading resources. In agriculture, the United States and Mexico trade back and forth water. Mexico grows tomatoes and bell peppers and mangoes full of water. They send them to the United States.
Yeah.
The United States grows corn and beef and wheat. They use water. We send it to Mexico. We're trading water, and we're doing our best to feed each other. And that's what's great about the trading agreement, is that we're able to use the growing regions, the industries that are very best and efficient at those, and deliver good prices for American consumers. And in that sense, the United States, Mexico, and Canada have a great thing going on, and we should feel very blessed.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And that's an excellent tie-in, like you say, to, because people do forget, right? You're actually in the trading of water. It's just to more of a finished product versus water itself. So, all right. Well, again, thank you guys very much. Hope you have lots of fun up on the hill, and rattle some cages and get something done up here. Damn, let's do something. All right, guys. Thanks a bunch. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity, man. Appreciate it. Hey, gang. I hope like hell you all enjoyed this week's episode of the Fresh Cred special edition coming from Washington, D.C. Guys, none of this is possible without our partners, so I want to take a few minutes just to give each one of them a shout out. I'd like to say thanks to IFPA, Equifruit, Corn and Image Packaging, Cactus Packing Supplies, Sunfed, and IFCO. And also, please take a second, if you're not already following us, to go out to our webpage and click to follow so you can catch all the episode drops and all the shows that we're putting out. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you guys soon.